Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healing Element podcast. We have a special time that we're broadcasting today because we have a very special guest who's joining us all the way from England. Jenny Lewis, she's a member of the Nia Community Collective. She's going to tell us a little bit about exactly what is the Nia Community Collective and how she became a part of that organization. The title of today's topic is Building a Black Collective. And we're going to be talking about how the killing of George Floyd sparked a movement in England and birthed the Nia Community Collective. And so I just wanted to say, we all know kind of the story of George Floyd and how it impacted us here. And we've seen on television as well, kind of what's been happening around the globe. And so I feel very honored to have Jenny with us here today to talk a little bit about her experience and what has been birthed out of a very tragic story. So with that being said, I would like to welcome Jenny to the Healing Element podcast. I do want to provide a bit of her bio, and then I want to let everyone know how I was able to connect with her. So first, the bio. So Jenny began her career as a nurse at King's College Hospital in London. Following 10 years of working in nursing, she completed her honors degree in social science at the University of London and went on to complete a postgraduate certificate in teaching at the Institute of Education Education in London. She worked as a teacher in several high schools in London and in the north of England, and then moved to Nassau, Bahamas, and taught at Queen's College High School for 4 years. After that, she moved back to the UK and completed a degree in psychology. Following this, she worked with people with drug and alcohol dependency who also had mental health issues. She then completed a postgraduate diploma in psychological interventions and became qualified as a psychotherapist. She also completed training in EMDR. She's been working as a psychotherapist for over 10 years and an EMDR therapist for the last 8 years. She's also a restorative, she's restorative, right? I'm throwing in the restorative. She's also a yoga teacher, and she has a special interest in generational trauma. And so now she has involvement with the Nia Community Collective, which aims to address inequalities in the Caribbean and African community. The areas of concern which they're focusing on are health and well-being, youth and community education, arts and culture, criminal justice and employment. And Jenny specifically is working on health inequalities. Welcome, Jenny, to the Healing Element podcast.
Thank you for having me, Kai Marie. Just a correction, I'm a yoga teacher in training, so I haven't qualified yet, hoping to qualify next month. So just to clarify that.
Okay, thank you. But even with that, you bring a very unique perspective to the work that you are doing. And so I wanted to say really quickly before we dive into our conversation today, kind of how we met. I, along with Shamel Mavens, who I hosted a ton of events with, if you follow me on social media, you'll see that. We did a yin yoga for the Black community, and that was just for us to hold space for members in our community, just to kind of talk about racial trauma and also do a little bit of yin yoga. And from that's how I met Jenny. She attended, and then we started to have a conversation about racial trauma and what it looks like in England and the similarities between here in the US and England. And that kind of delved into me saying, can you come on the podcast? So with that being said, is there anything that you want to add to the conversation that you and I particularly had, and then you can dive right into more about the organization?
Yes, it was a very good event, actually. So even better that I met you. And obviously, yes, we did spark that conversation. I guess we had it became apparent that we had very similar responses to what had happened to George Floyd. And, in England as well as in America. So I guess our conversation kind of sparked off with that, didn't it, really? And then I started to talk about the Nia Community Collective that I became a part of from that particular incident that occurred in America. And we got talking, and you spoke about a podcast that you have called The Healing Element. And here I am.
Yes, and I was excited to bring you on just because not only of the unique perspective that you have, but also just your sharing your own journey of kind of wrapping your mind around this whole thing of racism and how it impacts us, especially when we look at it from a mental health lens, which I think for so long we never really have. We just kind of, we as a community knew this thing of racism exists and we knew it impacted us, but we never really looked at it from our mental and emotional health. There's a direct link when we look at the science and research, we see that there's a direct link between the racism that we experience and chronic illness, depression, anxiety. So I am happy to see that now we're starting to pay more attention in connecting racism to mental health issues and chronic illnesses. It's about time, but it's also important that we can work to make our community well, but we need everybody to play a part in order for that to work, which is something that the Nia Community Collective is working to do. So can you tell us some about the organization, I guess even starting for how it came to be? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm going to get used to this. Okay, so Nia Community Collective was launched back in October 2019, actually, with their first event entitled Power of Women, or POW. And we've now strengthened our collaboration with several community groups coming on board to form a community collective. And in early June, prior to the Huddersfield Black Lives Matter march, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the world's response to the systemic racism and inequalities in our society, the Nia Community Collective formulated and later shared their vision and mission and values with the community. Now, I mentioned Huddersfield Black Lives Matter March because I live in a town called Huddersfield, which is in the north of England, and it's near Leeds, if you've ever heard of Leeds or Bradford. So we're kind of there. So it was born out of, formally rather, because we already had Nia Community Collective in a form, but like I said, it was really constituted after the George Floyd incident in America. Yeah.
So did you notice that what happened in George Floyd, the emotion of it, the tragedy, watching it online, do you think out of that became a push to kind of to really mobilize the Nia Community Collective, just of the outcry, maybe connecting with other people that are in England and say, oh my gosh, I have that same story. And just that raw emotion, again, seeing, George Floyd lose his life on video, did that have an impact to the group saying, you know what, we need to really become a force here in England?
Yes, it had a huge impact. It really did influence and mobilize the community generally. To even have a march, a Black Lives Matter march in our town was a big deal. And yes, Nia Community Collective was born out of that. We were enraged in England because what happened in America mirrors what happens in England. We go through very similar, if not the same experiences in England as Black Americans do. So yes, it had a massive impact. It had a massive impact in every arena, in the English communities and the Black communities. So even where I work for the National Health Service. Had a massive impact there, looking at the way that services are delivered to Black people and other ethnic minority groups within the health service in the area that I work in, particularly in the north of England. So, and what has happened now is that there is now more of a conversation around race. rather than it just being mentioned here and there. There is that conversation that has started, and it's not been comfortable, but it's a conversation that needs to continue to be had. And the conversation is going ahead, and it's happening, whether people like it or not. And we can't allow it to just stop. We have to carry on talking. We have to carry on trying to change things. Yeah.
That's so true. And to your point about having the conversation, I mean, so many times we have seen situations with Black communities and police officers. And, you know, we've seen the story a million times, you know, the George Floyd story, we've seen it before. And I think this was the first time that I saw people in our community coming out and saying, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. I don't want to go to work and pretend like I'm okay. You know, I saw posts on LinkedIn, right, where people are just like, don't talk to me today. Like, I'm going to work, but I don't want to be bothered. Like, this was the first time that members of the Black community, we were just, there was this kind of picture going around that says, I'm tired of just seeing this continuously played out. So the fact that you said, like, now we're having the conversation and it's necessary, it is, because it's almost like we're just mental exhaustion from just kind of operating in a space of everything is fine and just kind of knowing the racism is there, how it's impacting us, but just pushing us to move through the day. And we just reached a point where we say we can't do anymore. Do you see that was something similar that was happening in England?
Definitely happening in England. Like I said, it impacted on everybody here as well, because it just polarized the issues that we have also in England. And, you know, there's been the death of Stephen Lawrence, and, you know, the perpetrators of his death were not caught, well, years afterwards, before somebody, you know, was actually convicted for that. And even then there were issues there with the police and the way it was handled. So, you know, and there's been many others who have had similar experiences in England. So it's really hit home, you know, the fact that somebody actually died in front of us almost in live time. I mean, you know, this is crazy now, you know, it really is. And yeah, that just was the, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. Something had to be said and done. Yeah.
And so what we go into now learning more about the collective. So tell us about what is the Nia Community Collective. We kind of talked about the areas that it addresses. So tell us a little bit about the goals, and then how this group has kind of put this plan into play to bring change to the community.
Well, our goals are actually tied to our vision and our mission and our values. So first of all, our vision is to create a world where people from African and Caribbean communities are inspired to achieving their greater goals, you know, a world where they are actually represented and thriving in all areas of human endeavor, with circles of influence that communities can access to shape wider society. Currently, you know, we're experiencing cycles of fear in particular key areas in our lives, rather than circles of influence. So, you know, that is our vision. And the second thing is our mission. And our mission is to advance the opportunities for the health and wealth of Black, African, Caribbean people by developing a network of culturally competent organizations to support the community into self-determination and to work to eradicate systemic racism and inequalities in our society. And the third thing is our values, which are derived from the 7 days of Kwanzaa, which are fashioned around the 7 principles of this African diaspora holiday. And these principles underpin all the work of Nia Community Collective and are aligned to the African-centered focus of the communities, of the committee. So these values are the legacy building nature of the collective community for future generations of African and Caribbean people. So, we just think that, the African and Caribbean community, we continue to experience racism, and we're at high risk, of serious and even fatal outcomes. And that has been apparent, particularly in the current pandemic. So it was felt that a strong collective response was needed, and that the response came in the form of Nia Community Collective. So here we are today. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm so excited, and I'm looking forward to just everything that is going to come after this, because this is just the beginning. It's like you're just starting to really plant those seeds. So I know this is going to blossom into something major and huge. What has been the response from members of the Black community? Is it kind of like, oh my gosh, it's about time, we've needed you? Has there been some skepticism? So what's kind of been the pulse of the community with this new collective?
Well, the response so far has it's actually been quite good. Since we set up the collective, and what we have had is we've had a series of consultation meetings with the community. We've had 2 so far. Bearing in mind, we only really started in our fullest around about June, so we're still quite young organization. And when we've had these consultation meetings, we've had focus groups, we've done a series of surveys as well. And the response has been quite good. And on December the 17th, we're having a Zoom meeting again for the community, where we're going to present our findings from the surveys and the focus groups and the consultation groups. So I think the community have responded fairly well. There is a consciousness that is arising, that's been born out of what has happened this year with COVID and its impact on our Black and ethnic minority communities here, and also with the George Floyd incident, the racism, the systemic racism that we're experiencing here in England, that just continues. So there's been a good response. I think people are ready for change. People are beginning to recognize that this really can't go on. And what we're wanting to do as a collective is to work with other grassroots organizations, for the same purpose of elevating our communities and getting them a seat at the table in influencing change in their lives.
So from the experience of building the collective and the surveys, have you noticed that many members of our community have been kind of boxed out or locked out of the ability to be a part of organizations, or their voices have been silenced because of racism? Have you seen maybe more of those stories start to surface than maybe even people thought was even there?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. I mean, my story, when I was teaching, I remember teaching in a school, a high school, and they were year 7s that I was teaching, so they're aged 11. And I remember it was at the beginning of the class, and this is my lived experience. We were at the beginning of the class. All the children were stood in front of behind their chairs, getting ready to be seated. It was the beginning of the lesson, and I was stood at the front, and I just called for silence so that we could start, and everyone was calm. And then all of a sudden, from nowhere, an older boy just came into the room, and he said, "Oh, and he said the N-word. And I just stood there in front of 30 children, thinking to myself, what on earth just happened? They heard that. I had to hear it. And I was in such shock that I just carried on with the lesson as best as I could. I didn't go chasing up after the boy, the young man. I just thought, I've got a class here to teach. I just got to carry on. And so I carried on with the class. And I remembered at the end of that day, feeling very despondent, feeling disappointed, thinking to myself, this is my teaching career, and this is the way I'm being treated. Okay, yes, it's a child, but it still hurt nonetheless. But the worst thing about that situation was I didn't feel that I had anyone I could speak to. I didn't go to the head teacher. I didn't go to another teacher. I didn't go to the deputy head. I felt alone. I was the only Black teacher in the school, and I just felt alone. And I just thought, what are they going to do? They're not going to find him. No one's going to own up to it. I'm just me on my own. And for a moment, I felt totally lost and totally alone. And my teaching career lasted probably a year after that because I just couldn't carry on with it. And that was the end of the teaching, unfortunately. And, my story is just one of so many stories of workplace racism. There's racism in the criminal justice system. There's racism in our education system, in our healthcare system. It's just everywhere. So, we're getting to hear a lot of these lived experiences, and we have done throughout the consultation meetings that we've had. And, we want to use these lived experiences to help to shape the things that we need to see change in our community in terms of attitudes and structural racism.
Yeah, and what you said there is the story that you provided. I think it perfectly illustrates how racism is a power dynamic, right? The fact that you felt alone, no one to go to, and even as a teacher feeling, what can I do to this white male student who's going to believe me? When ordinarily you would think that a teacher's word, right, that would be taken more over the word of a student, let's say by administrators or the higher ups within that school. But understanding how the dynamics of racism works, knowing that, what is going to be said, is somebody going to defend his actions and say, well, he didn't really mean to say that. And so it's only enrage you probably even more because it's like, he knew exactly what he said and he knew he could say it and he knew he could say it and get away with it. So that shows how racism, and this is one thing that anytime I talk about racism or I do any workshops, especially the workshops that I do with Chevelle, who's joining us now live, we always harp on how racism is a power dynamic. It's about the ability to do exactly what that student did and know that you can get away with it. And us as a Black community feeling powerless against kind of like the powers that be, if you will. So I think it's beautiful what the collective is doing is now giving a space for members of our community to say, hey, you can come here, share your voice, share your thoughts, your concerns, what you're going through. And Dwayne says, me on my own, the feeling of every Black person working with, yes. And that is, that can be very that's traumatizing in itself. And we haven't even talked about the traumas piece. That's probably a whole nother topic in itself. But the work that you're doing in creating safe spaces for members of our community, are you also kind of bridging some type of, road or so to members of the white community when you said that you're working with other organizations? Does that include other white communities or is it other ethnic groups that have their own organizations?
So we're aligning with other Black African groups. And we're doing that because we need our voices to be heard. And those voices need to be heard to those white establishments, to those decision makers, and taking that voice to them in order to enable them to listen, to say, listen, this is what's really happening. You can't do anything for us without us. And unless you know our lived experiences, how can you then dictate what we actually need? So, in terms of when you talk about white organizations, we're not aligning with white organizations, we're aligning with Black organizations. We need something for us. We need to have that safe space where we can talk, where we can, voice what we're experiencing. And what Nia wants to do is to be that bridge, almost, that umbrella organization, but also that bridge that takes the community voices to these people, these white establishments, I guess, and to say, listen, this is what's happening, and this is what we need in our communities. What are you doing about it? There are so many reviews that have been done over the years that have been shelved. They're still sitting there. There's all these recommendations in all these reviews, but there still hasn't been any action. And yet still, there are more and more reviews. And, the actions are, the recommendations are very good, but where are they in practice? It's not happening. And that's what we're really wanting to fight for here and to get going. We need this train to start running. It's got everything it needs on it. Let's run it now. Let's get on with it.
Right. It's so true. There are so many research papers and documented evidence of the impact of racism. When we look at here in the US, there's research papers on education, disparities in education, as you said, health, housing. Every area you look, there's the disparities that exist. We right now we're talking a lot about income inequality as it relates to race. And then COVID kind of, again, shined this bright light on how the Black community is more impacted by COVID-19 and why. Why is that happening? Now the whole push now is about the vaccines, which again is a whole other story.
Don't even go there. We're not going there today, are we?
You're right. There's all this research of how our communities are being negatively impacted. And it's almost like it just stops at the research. And sometimes it does contain information on, okay, these are some steps we can do to remedy the situation. And it stops right there. And I think the thing is that we don't want to deal with race. We can do all the research that we want. We can have the conversation. But as soon as you start taking action to address racism, that's when all of a sudden things start to fall apart. For some reason, there's like a blockage to move forward with taking action items. Have you noticed that similar things happening in England when it's like, okay, we got the papers, now let's put stuff in action. And as soon as you get to the action point, that's when all of a sudden it's like, well,
yeah, that's definitely the case. Definitely the case. I mean, there was a program that was supposed to happen in our community that was advertised to happen in October to help the Black community, and it was later pulled. So, clearly some people didn't agree to it, and that would have benefited the Black community, but it didn't happen. So, it's the great grandiose ideas, but the action is lacking, unfortunately. So, yeah, all sounds great, but if you're not going to put one foot in front of the other and get the work done, then what's the point?
Exactly. Knowing that, what has been your experience when you have kind of went to those white institutions, organizations and say, hey, listen, this is what we're finding. Have you seen that it's like, oh, we should research that? Or has it still come to the inaction? And again, this is generally speaking.
Well, to be fair, we're only young, so we've only just started doing this work. What I've done so far is gone to our local, well, when I say our local, we spoke with a representative from the healthcare sector, and she has the role of working with the Black community to ensure equality in terms of the delivery of healthcare, but also access to healthcare. And she was very inviting. She was really on board with us. So I was quite impressed with her, actually. And, she was saying that she wants Nia to be part of, be a part of helping them to reach communities. So that was quite enlightening for me, but it was quite encouraging as well that people do want to do something. It's whether or not there's going to be a momentum or whether this is just a moment. That's the thing. It's whether or not it's going to carry on, because it's like that. It's like running out of steam. We're all high in the moment, but when the moment is over, everybody just goes back to normal. And what is normal? We can't go back to normal. What's normal anyway? I mean, COVID threw normal out of the window, didn't it? So, I think there's always probably going to be some reservations within certain establishments. But I don't know what the threat is. I don't understand what the threat is. So, yeah, it's a question I still can't answer, unfortunately.
I should probably unmute myself. So guys, we are doing mute just to help with the echo, because we have a little bit of echo, so that's why we're kind of muting ourselves. But I think what you're talking about is when we start having that deep level conversation about race, and we say, so what is it? And Chevelle said, the research stops because they don't want to share power. When we look at it from that lens of, if we have the ability to fully control our own destiny, then what does that mean for the powers that be? And so I think that thought may create some concern. It's like, so how do we continue to manage this community, without them becoming too powerful? And we've seen that throughout the history, like in the civil rights movement, here in the US, and even before the civil rights, of that kind of fighting against racism. Basically, we've seen that anytime that it's two people that are trying to have control. And so with that, you're going to typically bump up to some challenging times. It's not impossible. It just raises some challenges, which that's all part of life, is acknowledging those challenges and then overcoming them. But I think when you start going and saying, we want to, these are issues, you're going to have to start making changes with your hiring policies, or like looking at the top level of your executive board. We got to make changes there. And I know one thing that we talked about before was not just making changes for people that look like us, but actually policy changes that impact us in a positive way, right? Because it doesn't help if your board is full of Black folks at the top, but the Black people that are the staffers underneath still feel isolated and alone because that group at the top is still supporting like this type of racist ideology. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I would totally agree with that. You're absolutely right. And yeah, we all say that we want to be placed at the table to have those conversations. But it's really important as well that when we're in those positions, that we're actually working to help our own as well. Because what can happen is that when you reach those positions as a Black person and you're sat on those panels, or in those positions where you're actually influencing change, I guess you have to be careful that you remember who you are, and that you are representing us to a larger degree, and not to forget us, but to help build us and bring us up as well. So that's really, I think that's really important, that we recognize that we are responsible to help each other, even when we get to those positions. So, for example, in the job I do, I am the only Black psychotherapist in my department, as it were. But, hopefully we'll get more, and it would be great to mentor that person, to help them to feel confident and to feel that, that they can do a good job despite the color of their skin.
Right. I agree with that. And I think a lot of that comes with having that support system, which that's what the collective offers. Because, like you said, so now if someone is finding themselves as the only Black person in the room, now there's a whole organization that they can go to and say, this is my experience. There's someone that they can go to and talk to about the trauma of that. And, they can provide feedback on how they can navigate that space, which I think I just love the organization, and I'm so happy that you're here to talk about it, because I think this is so needed, because I think that racism has really evolved, and so now it's kind of like happening, but we pretend like it's not happening. It's evolved to that point, so there's no longer like signs up that says like, no Black people allowed, but either you kind of feel you're not allowed, or you don't see yourself there, or you're put in certain places, but there's no support there for you. So all of those are indicators that your presence is probably not really wanted. So I do want to go into, before we run out of time, I do want to go into the part that you're focusing on is the health and well-being that I think is so critical. And we spoke about that on offline. So can you share with us a little bit about that part of the group?
Unmute, that would help. So one of the areas that we're focusing on is health and well-being, which I am, I guess, heading up with another colleague, Nicole Peterson. And what we're looking is we want to really raise awareness of the health disparities in our communities. Now, we already know that they're there. It's all publicized on our government website. So the information is there. But again, it comes back to, so what are you doing about it then? For example, if Black females are 5 times more at risk of dying in pregnancy in England? I didn't know that until more recently, and I was shocked. Black women are more likely to have experienced a common mental health disorder, such as anxiety and depression. Black men are more likely to have experienced a psychotic disorder, and this was by 2017. So I don't know what those figures are now. I don't think they'll be much different. And that, Black adults, particularly males, are more likely to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act than any other adult group. So, and there's other health disparities. It's across the board, mental health and physical health. And so, what we need to do is to try and influence these decision makers to start to look at these reviews, these disparities, and to take on board the recommendations that have been made by these people who have actually conducted these reviews. Because again, as I said, they get put on the shelf. So I guess what we're wanting to do is to say, here, there it is, that's the review. This is the strategy that we need to take on board here. This is what needs to happen now. So what are you doing? So I guess Nia is really that engine to drive that conversation with, the people who make these policy decisions. So yeah, that's what the health aspect of, the health area within Nia is trying to build. To have that conversation with key decision makers to make those changes that have been recommended, but also to take on board the voices of the community as well with that. There's no point in making decisions without our voices and hearing what our experiences are. And that's what I am trying to do in relation to the health and well-being aspect of Nia.
I love what you said as far as you providing what's needed to different institutions or organizations. Like, I love that we are telling our story and we are saying what we need. And I think that you had actually said this in the beginning of our conversation today, is that we're so used to people coming into our community and telling us what we need, what we should be doing. But I love the fact that this grassroots effort is saying, no, we have the data, we have the statistics, we're going to present to you what has already been done, the research been done, but also how we as a community feel that these issues need to be addressed. That is empowering in itself. So have you seen like kind of taking that, that type of control of the narrative and saying, you know, this is what we need. We don't need somebody else telling us what our community needs. We're taking control and saying, this is what we need these institutions to do. Do you think that that's provided even more support from the Black community?
Well, this is what the Black community want. You know, they want to have that voice. They want to be heard. But as individuals, it's really difficult. You know, and you have, you know, individuals who are able to say, listen, this is what I want for my care. So, for example, you go to see your general practitioner, your doctor. You tell your doctor, I'm experiencing depression and anxiety, and this is on an individual level now. I'm just giving you an example. So, you know, you go into that surgery and you say, this is what I want. You know, I'm experiencing these symptoms. I think I'm depressed. I think I'm anxious. You know, I feel that I need some form of therapy. But sometimes that conversation isn't happening. You know, sometimes what is happening is we're telling our GPs what the symptoms are, particularly around mental health, and the GP may be offering medication as opposed to therapy. And there has been some recent research that has borne this out, some research that was conducted in London more recently. And, you know, and this again is about helping our communities to understand and navigate through the healthcare system so that they are able to recognize what they are entitled to. You can only recognize what you're entitled to when you know what's already out there. If you have no knowledge, then how do you know what you're able to access? And so Nia, we're going to try and address that within the health aspect of the community collective. But I guess it's you know, having that voice to actually say, this is what I want, this is what I need. You're offering this to certain other members of the community. I want therapy too. But, you know, we tend to be given medication as opposed to therapy. And even when we are given therapy, which is another issue, it's not necessarily culturally competent therapy either. And that's another issue and another aspect that I'm very, very much interested in, because I'm a therapist. And, you know, I would like to offer more culturally competent therapy to my community. That wasn't my training. My training was based on colonial theories, you know. So that's something that I need to learn more about myself, and then to be able to deliver that to my own community, but also to gather other therapists who have the same or similar mindset to want to also deliver that type of therapy to our communities.
You know, that's so true, Jenny, because, okay, so I'm not a therapist, I'm a yoga teacher, so I just want to put that out there. But I'm in the space of healing and seeing how you can begin to heal, break patterns, and begin to live a more fulfilling life, right? And begin your healing journey, start your healing journey. And the thing with our community is, you know, it's hard to either begin, continue, however you want to say it, your healing journey, because you continue to be traumatized, right? Whether it's something on television, at work, some type of social function. So when you said kind of what does healing look like for us, I definitely think that's something that we need to explore. Like here, you know, yes, we talk a lot about talk therapy and, you know, not knocking that at all, but does talk therapy for us in the Black community, does that benefit us, or are we looking at it more from a European lens? So how do we need to heal? And so I think the beauty of what you're doing is exploring just that. Does our healing look like how we've been taught? You know, or does I have my little book. I think I showed this little book that I that I read. I showed this book when we were doing our yin yoga practice. And in this book, the author, Gail Parker, talks about how, I think it was in Rwanda, how they healed from the genocide that took place, and how their healing was being out in nature, under the sun, song and dance, hearing the beat of the drums, sharing stories. And these Western doctors came in for therapy, and they wanted to like separate everybody, put everybody in a room, isolate them. And the doctor, they're like, what are you doing? And they're like, you're going to put someone in a room by themselves? That's not how we do therapy. And so that was the first time I really thought about like, wow, maybe our therapy looks different. Like maybe it's something we need to create. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yes, definitely. This is something that has been more of a recent revelation to me. I don't see a lot of Black patients, to be fair, but I think that could be because of where I actually work. There's not a huge Black population, but even where I worked before, that was the case. So I'm kind of thinking, is it that we see mental health in a way that is, well, actually, we don't talk about that. We push it under the carpet. It's embarrassing for the family. It's just something that we don't talk about. It's very taboo. Or she's mad. Don't talk to her. Or he's crazy. We don't bother with him. Rather than seeing mental health as something that might be coming from an earlier time. We talk about this generational trauma, and I think it's starting to gather more ears now. We're hearing this a lot more. I'm certainly hearing it a lot more this year. And there does need to be a healing of our people. And there also needs to be an arena where that needs to happen, and that can happen. And I'm not so sure if that can happen in a very Eurocentric therapy room. And I am in a Eurocentric therapy room. I deliver that therapy. That's my bread and butter, as we say here in England. That's what I get paid to do. But for me personally, I've been traumatized. I've been traumatized over and over again. I can be traumatized when I go into a shop and I'm standing in a queue and I'm there, you can see me, but then you ask the other person what they need, or the next person that they're serving is somebody who's actually behind you. Hello, you not see me here? I'm pretty tall, so I can't be missed. So, and just small microaggressions like that, it gets to you. And it's that weathering effect, isn't it? That over and over microaggressions, this unconscious bias. I remember when I was training to do this job, great place that I trained in, but I was, again, the only Black person on the course, and I just felt alone. So I'm just one Black person who's experiencing this. So what are other Black people experiencing? And how can we help them with their healing? And I'm not so sure if the therapy that we offer that is Eurocentric is able to address all those needs. It may be able to address the anxiety and depression on that level, but there's stuff that we have that's on a deeper level that also needs to be worked through. And I think that deeper stuff is very buried trauma that needs to be addressed.
Totally agree. And you're right. I'm seeing more conversations about generational trauma as it relates to our community. And I remember just a few years ago just kind of researching it after reading Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and finding limited information. She speaks specifically about African Americans, and finding very little research documents about that experience. So I think that it's great that we're starting to have the conversation more, and maybe that will lead to more a different type of therapy. We can get creative on how does our treatment look being that we're still in a very unhealthy environment, right? It's not as though while a Black person is going through therapy that now they're in this positive environment, they're no longer maybe isolated at work, or they have this great support system. Many times they're still going through those traumatizing events throughout the day, or even turn on the news or look at social media, or maybe their child comes home or partner comes home and tells them about their day of, experiencing some type of racism. So it is constant. So I definitely agree with you that our therapy will have to look a little different. And I think the beauty of what you're doing is exploring that to see what it will look like and having input from the community to say, okay, what do you guys need? Where are the areas that you need support? And I think that's how you begin to build that out to figure out what's needed.
Absolutely. And that's why we're having these consultation meetings, so that we get the point of views from, our community and getting to grips with what their needs are, so that we can align that with the actual services that are out there to help them.
So true. So if you are watching us live, please give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying our conversation today. Very important conversation, talking to Jenny all the way from England, sharing with us how the Nia Community Collective was established, the story behind it, and also her personal experience with living in this world of racism, specifically in England. And so if people want to know more about the Nia Community Collective, how can they find out more? Are you guys on social media or maybe a website?
Yes, we do have a website. It's www.ncc, which is Nia Community Collective, and it's a dash uk.org/. So that's www.ncc-uk.org/. And we're on Facebook as well, and we're just Nia Community Collective on Facebook. We also have an email that is ncc.org.uk@gmail.com.
All right, so I just put that information in the chat box, and I will also put it in the description box of this video, so that way when people, if they did not join us live, they'll be able to check there to check it out and support any way that we can. So as we start to wrap up, which I know we can go on and on. I know when we were talking, I think we were on Zoom for
a long time. Ages and ages. It was good. It was good.
It was good, right? And so before that happens again, I want to thank you so much for coming on the platform. You're definitely welcome to come back. I would love to hear all the new things that are going on.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Would love to. So is there any kind of parting words that you would like to provide our viewers with today? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Well, I guess there's something about how do we understand our value and our worth? And I think, firstly, we know our worth when we know who we are, and we know who we are when we know our history. And that is something that I'm discovering more and more this year. There's been some great Zoom events that's been going on in England at the moment with people like Andrew Mohammed, Leo Marshall, breaking down so many things so that we understand our history. And it's been enlightening to me over the last few months. So, knowing our worth is so important, but also as well working together as a community and not being so fragmented. We can do so much more together than we can as individuals, I believe. And, eradicating this suspicious and this suspicion and this fear that we have of each other, and to see ourselves, we are the same, and we can work together. I feel your pain, Dr. DeGrue, the book around post-traumatic slave disorder. She was talking about, how in Africa, when they greet each other, it's "I see you." Whereas in our society, it's like, what are you looking at? What are you staring at? Very much like that. I used to live in London and it was like that. You sat on a train, you don't look at somebody or else they're coming at you. But I see you. I sometimes see your pain too, and that's okay. So those are my parting words.
Thank you so much. And that's so important for us to think about as we kind of leave the space and go throughout our day is, how do we view ourselves? How do we view the people that we interact with? Because how we treat ourselves, that's going to show up in people. There's a to that. Jenny, thank you so much for being on the Healing Element podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Kat.
And if you could hold on for 1 second, and we're going to end our broadcast. So if you've been listening, again, please give this video a thumbs up. Please also share with your networks. A very important conversation, not only about the effect that George Floyd's death had globally, specifically in England, but also what the Nia Community Collective is doing to really talk about mental health and the importance of that when we're talking about the issue of racism. So thank you so much for your support. If you would like to learn more about me and my services, please visit kaimarie.com and make sure you tune in next Tuesday. I'll be back to my regular time at 8 p.m. live on the Healing Element Podcast YouTube channel and also Kai Marie Facebook page for another broadcast. We're going to be talking about winter solstice. So please make sure you subscribe to that. You guys have a great day.